This series of programmes is dedicated to those of us who, using our government-sponsored bus passes, spend our days travelling the byways of Britain for nothing. This is Clevedon on the North Somerset coast, and this is where our adventures start today. Just one bus for me today, a 361 into the nearest city, Bristol. My target area is the famous Harbourside, which was once one of the busiest docks on the west coast of England. Bristol has two major rivers passing through its centre. One is the River Avon, that flows out under the famous Clevedon suspension bridge and into the Bristol Channel at Avonmouth. The other is this one, built in the early 1800s and still called the New Cut. The problem was that the tidal range of the Bristol Channel is the second greatest in the world. At Bristol, the water level can change as much as 12 metres twice a day. This meant that ships in the harbour would be stranded at the dockside in the mud when the tide went out. The answer was to divert the tidal river down the newly built New Cut and then block the original course of the river at both ends. The result was this, the non-tidal floating harbour, named simply because now the ships could float rather than capsize into the mud. Anchor Road bus stop is my destination, right opposite the newly opened Bristol Aquarium and the very popular At Bristol Interactive Science Centre. Millennium Square was built, you've guessed it, in the year 2000, on the site of some old dockland warehouses. There are a couple of permanent residents in the square. One is the famous Hollywood actor Cary Grant, who was born Archibald Alexander Leach in Bristol in 1904. On this wintry day, the silver fountains were home to a couple of bathing pigeons, but in the summer months children break free from their parents' reins to frolic in the pools whilst their parents sit watching the giant TV screen, just like home.
In Points West, it's full steam ahead for the restoration of the Medway Queen. All aboard in half an hour.
More about that news item later in my walk. So, as the mural says, welcome to Bristol's Harbourside. In the 1920s, huge concrete bonded warehouses for tobacco were constructed in this area. These were blown up in a spectacular fashion in 1988 to make way for the construction of this imposing Lloyds Bank headquarters building. This is a trip of pure nostalgia for me. Nearly 60 years ago, I started work in Bristol as a trainee photographer, and one of our assignments was to come down here to the port of Bristol to photograph the shipping, and it was a thriving port in those days, and I remember it well. These old photographs were not taken by me, but they do serve to show the area as it was 50 years ago. Bristol Harbour has been in existence since the 13th century. In 1670, the city had 6,000 tons of shipping, of which half was tobacco. By the late 17th and early 18th century, this shipping was also playing a significant role in the slave trade. Since the 1980s, millions of pounds have been spent regenerating the Harbourside. Nowadays, Bristol Harbour hosts the Bristol Harbour Festival in July of each year, attended by tall ships and hundreds of ships and boats of all kinds. The brown boat on the other bank is a replica of the good ship Matthew. On this side of the harbour you can see the Cabot Tower, a memorial to the explorer John Cabot, who in 1497 set sail across the Atlantic in the original Matthew. In 1997, on the 500th anniversary of the landmark voyage, the modern-day Matthew reconstructed Cabot's original journey to Newfoundland and was welcomed into the port of Bonavista by Queen Elizabeth II. The statue of John Cabot now stands nearby on the harbour walkway. Samuel Plimsoll was born in Bristol in 1824. His only claim to fame is the Plimsoll line, painted on all ships to show their loading limits. Seen several times on my walk today, this little ferry plies its trade across the harbour to several landing stages, all for 80p single. One of the destinations is the dry dock where Brunel's famous passenger steamship, the SS Great Britain, is now permanently moored. I will talk more about her when I get nearer to her on the other side. I said this was a nostalgic journey for me, and the area across there is particularly poignant, as in the 1950s it was the site of Charles Hill's shipbuilding yard, and the firm I worked for had the contract to photograph every launch that took place there. Some of these pictures were probably taken by us. Some of us would stand on the ground to take them, some would climb up into the cranes to gain a better view. The area is now the site of the Bristol Marina, and I plan to drop in there on my return along the other side of the harbour later. As I said, this walk is pure nostalgia. Sorry. The Pride of Bristol was an ex-Royal Navy tender, which is now used to teach youngsters the basic skills of seamanship, ship handling and safety at sea. And the grain barge is a historic converted barge which is now used as a restaurant that is described as bursting with character and is a perfect place to relax and watch the world go by. Further down the dockside, now populated with desirable residences, is the Svenska, a beautiful traditional sailing ship. A converted fishing vessel built of oak and launched in Sweden in 1938, she is now used as an adventure ship. Once home to visiting cargo ships, the small inlet called Pool's Wharf is now haven for non-residential moorings. We are approaching the halfway point of our walk. Up ahead is the inner lock to the Cumberland basin, and another connection with Isambard Kingdom Brunel, for he was engaged to redesign this lock to allow his ships, Great Western and Great Britain, to pass out. The three red warehouses on the other bank were bonded tobacco storage buildings. The large bales of tobacco were stored here until the various cigarette makers in the city paid their tobacco tax to release them. Cumberland Basin is the last non-tidal part of the floating harbour. From now on, beyond this swing bridge called the Plimsoll Bridge, and through the lock, you're in the River Avon, with its mighty 12-metre difference between high and low tide. William Jessop, engineer in charge of building the floating harbour, had created a weir in the dam here at Underfall to allow surplus water to flow back into the tidal New Cut behind this building. But it didn't work, and by the 1830s the floating harbour was suffering from severe silting. Brunel devised a solution involving 3 shallow sluices and 1 deep scouring sluice between the harbour and the New Cut. It worked, of course, and still does. As a caravaner, I have to show you this, a site on the Harbourside, run by the Caravan Club, for members only. It is not generally realised that it is possible to take a small boat right across the country. Starting from the Bristol Channel at Avonmouth, you would go up the river Avon, through this floating harbour, and past the Bristol Marina, which was built on the site of the Charles Hill shipbuilding yard in 1980. You would then rejoin the River Avon east of Bristol and travel up to Bath before transferring to the Kennet and Avon Canal. Finally, after navigating 100 locks, you would join the River Thames at Reading, a distance of nearly 90 miles. Now back to that local news story you heard in the Millennium Square. This is the Medway Queen, the last estuary paddle steamer surviving in the United Kingdom, being extensively rebuilt in the dry dock once owned by Charles Hills. She was built on the River Clyde and saw extensive service during the evacuation of Dunkirk, rescuing 7,000 men. Next door is the home of Wallace and Gromit, but I don't think I will disturb them from their adventures. When she was launched in Bristol in 1843, the SS Great Britain was the first ship to embrace the new technologies of an iron hull, a screw propeller and a massive 1,000 horsepower steam engine. The SS Great Britain continued sailing until 1886 and travelled 32 times round the world and spent nearly 1 million miles at sea. She was finally abandoned in the Falkland Islands and used as a floating coal and grain store. Finally, in 1970, she was refloated and towed back home across the Atlantic to Bristol. £9.95 is the price of a concessionary ticket, and that includes free return visits for 12 months. The Matthews crew is preparing for a very exciting sailing programme for the coming year. The highlights include a visit to the World Pilot Gig Championships in the Isles of Scilly in May and the pageant on the River Thames in June to commemorate the Queen's Diamond Jubilee. This pilot gig from Clevedon is also booked to go to the same events. She is one of 2 gigs going from the Bristol area. The other is the Isambard from Bristol Gig Club. It's good to see that some of the dock area has been retained as a heritage site. Indeed, from now on till the end of our walk, the scene is full of my favourite nostalgia, Bristol docks. The Fairburn steam crane is the only surviving example of a curved jib crane. This meant it could reach further into the hold of a ship and lift very heavy weights. It is a scheduled ancient monument and it still works and is demonstrated on occasional weekends. This transit shed was where Guinness was once landed from Ireland. Now it is the M Shed Industrial Museum, and it's free. As part of the M Shed's outside display, there are permanently moored 3 boats with long histories with the Port of Bristol. Built in Bristol in 1934, Pyronaut was a crucial part of the dock's firefighting service for about 40 years. Mayflower is a steam tug built in Bristol in 1861 and is believed to be the oldest surviving tug in the world. The John King, a diesel tug, was built in 1934 to tow cargo ships from Bristol City docks to the mouth of the River Avon. A landmark on Bristol docks, these cargo cranes are a link to the city's 1950s trading heyday. I remember them well. Overlooking the docks is St Mary Redcliffe, described by Queen Elizabeth I as the goodliest, fairest and most famous parish church in England. I show this boat for no other reason than on its waterline is a graffiti by the Bristol artist Banksy. Finally, a view of a boat that regularly visits our pier at Clevedon, berthed here for her winter quarters. We are virtually back where we started. Hope you enjoyed the walk. Goodbye.